Okay, so we are in Pharshat Terumah. As you could see, we're back again in our undisclosed location due to this snowstorm in this dojo. I want to look at two things about this parasha, some of the components of the Mishkan, mainly the parochet and the menorah, So it says, "Ve'asita parochet chelet ve'argaman, ve'tola'at shani ve'shesh moshzar, ma'aseh choshev ya'aseh ota." Right? And it tells us the ingredients of what we need to make it for, how we're going to make it, the colors, and so on. And then it talks about kruvim. We should make it kruvim. "Ve'natata ota al arba'ah amudei shitim mitzupim zahav, va've'em zahav." And it's basically telling us how to build the parochet, how to construct the parochet, and where to put it, and how to place it. And at the end, it says, "Vehivdila parochet lachem ben hakodesh uven kodesh hakodeshim." And the parochet, which is the curtain, is going to separate between the holy and the holy of holies. Now, that's in Shmot Chavav, Lamed Aleph and Lamed Gimel. So there are two different types, two different jobs that we're trying to fulfill here with the parochet. So in Parashat Terumah, the purpose of the parochet is, as we said, "Ve'ivdila parochet lachem ben hakodesh uben kodesh hakodeshim," to separate between the holy and holy of holies. As Rashbam says, "Lashon mechitza ve'havdala ben bayit lebayit." So it is a separation between one chamber to the other chamber. So the parochet, the significance of the parochet is the borderline between the two parts of Beit HaMikdash, the temple. Like, for example, just like the hooks, so that it comes under the parochet, it symbolizes the limit. So this is in the top of the Mishkan also. So according to this, we can understand that placing the parochet comes before putting the Aron inside. Why? Because as long as the Kodesh HaKodashim was not defined, hello David, when Kodesh HaKodashim was not defined by the parochet, you cannot place the Aron inside because the place for the Aron hasn't been defined yet. It has to be a specific place. We designate the place, then we put the tabernacle inside. So the two different jobs of the parochet in Parashat Terumah, as we said before, "V'ivdila parochet lachem ben hakodesh uven kodesh hakodeshim." So that's basically what we have in terms of that. So we see from here that, of course, that there is another time of the parochet which talks about Parashat Pikudei, and over there the order is a little different. And of course, there's a famous Ramban about it. It talks about it. But we see that both parashiot really come to express different type of attributes and two different types of aspects of the parochet as it comes. So halacha lema'aseh, it seems that from the words of the Mishnah in Masechet Yoma, in Perek Hey Daf Mem Aleph, on the way that the Kohen Gadol enters Kodesh HaKodeshim in Yom Kippurim, it says the following: Haya me'alech ba'echal, he used to go into the chamber, Ad shemagia leben shtei haparochot, until he reaches two different parochot. All of a sudden, we have two, who separates between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodeshim, uvenehem Amma. In between them, there is a space of Amma. Amma is about a foot and a half, right? Rabbi Yossi says, Lo hayta sham ela parochet achat bilvad. There were no two, there was only one. Shene'emar vehivdila parochet. And it says vehivdila, therefore it's a singular. So it has to be one parochet when separated between Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodeshim. So the Mishnah brings the Machloket Tanaim if we had one parochet, one curtain, or like Rabbi Yossi learned, or maybe there were two parochot. So the Gemara over there in Daf, I'm sure you guys remember, in Daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet, ask the question on the Shita, on the opinion of Chachamim. So it says, Shafir ke hamar lau Rabbi Yossi le Rabbanan. It's good, but Rabbi Yossi said to Rabbanan. And the answer of the Gemara is, the Rabbanan Amri Lach, and Chachamim says, Hani mili b'mishkan. That there were two talking about the Mishkan. Aval b'mikdash sheni, in the second temple, kevan delo have amat raksin, ובמקדש הראשון הוא דהווה, והסתפקילה הוא לרבנן בקדושתה, איקה לפנים, איקה לחוץ, ועבוד שתי פרוכת. So according to the words of the Gemara, in Bet HaMikdash, there were two parochot. However, the Gemara gives to it a technical excuse, a technical reason for that. And the doubt in regarding to the concept of that amah, to that space that separated between the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKodashim, but it's very possible that really in practical, those two different parochot had the significance of the two different parochot that were in the Mishkan. One was, as the Torah says, Prisat HaMasach, and the other one was Parochet HaKodesh. One was the curtain, and one was the holy parochet. So you see from here that the job of the parochet is really to separate, to put a border, to define the borders between the holy and holy of holies. And the concept of bordering, it is a very loaded and important subject. Unfortunately, you see it today. People don't have boundaries. And I'm going to tell you the following. When you don't have boundaries, says the Netivot Shalom, when you don't have boundaries, you can reach holiness. A society that has no boundaries, it is an unholy society. Boundaries are a necessity to reach holiness. It's a must. If we don't go talk about Aristotle, every shape, I call it shape, is finite, and it really includes within it something that is not included, doesn't have an existence in space, because it needs to have some volume. So the boundaries, therefore, is very important because it's the condition for the existence. So when the boundary line falls apart, shape falls apart as well, starts to crumble. So when you don't have boundaries yourself, the tzura, the shape of a Jew falls apart. Hey, Shalom. Good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in a long time. And yesterday I said, we missed you. And I see Shabtai is here. Is here, which is terrific. Anyway, so that is very important. The tzura of a Jew is defined by the boundaries, what you define yourself to be. And when the shape falls apart, it becomes a flat plateau. There's nothing that you could build on. Doesn't have volume. So, and the boundaries is something that we usually cross over, and then we pass through. And by doing so, we divide the world into two parts: the world before that line, and the world after the line. It's fascinating to me. It's simply fascinating to me. If you know anything about Japanese culture, and you look, for example, at Japanese, and I'm just using that as an example to show you that concept exists in many ancient cultures, by the way. So if you look, sometimes you would see those white pieces of paper that look like a lightning bolt like this. And they come on a string and they're all like this. Do you know what they're defining? They define a holy area that after that line you can pass. Only specific people like Shinto priest or something can go in. Not only gaijin, foreigners like us, even Japanese people that are not Zen or Shinto priest cannot pass that line. Many times in Japanese houses, you would find in the entrance to the house those paper bolts that they fold and they make like this to create a separation between the outside world and the home. If you talk about anybody knows what tori is? Tori are those Japanese gates, very famous to, like this, they go. So almost like tzurat petach, if you know what I mean, lehavdil tzurat petach. The concept of a eruv, when we have an eruv, is also a metaphysical, which become physical, definition of boundaries. The beyond that you can cross. That's the holy camp. Inside you can carry, outside you cannot carry. So you see that thing exists in many, many places. Maybe it will make you appreciate, because usually if I tell you something about Judaism, you see it restrictive. If I tell you something about Japanese, you probably would like it more. But that's the reality. In all ancient cultures understood that. So the boundary, the border, is the place that from that part, the person who is standing is the border itself is the guard, is the policeman, is the doorman, and so on and so forth. And that's what makes I mean, by the way, if you think about it this way, that's why we put the mezuzah on the outside of the door. It's another separation between the world out and yourself and the house. So our parochet separates, and that's the boundary between the holy and the holy of holies. It defines what's holy, and it is a necessity for the existence of the holy. And from in front of it, not behind it, there is the world, there is the border, and from that there is Ribbono Shel Olam, Kadosh Baruch Hu. If you're going to look at the evolvement of how much the parochet had changed in Jewish life, you might actually understand a little bit more about what's going on today. So if you know, when we have a parochet in shul, which is very weird, when we take the Torah, we move the parochet to the side, we remove the parochet to the side. And I'll show you something a little bit maybe after that. So the Tosefta in Masechet Yomah, which is the Masechta that deals with Yom Kippur, really describes to us when the Kohen Gadol enters to inside the temple, and he takes the blood of the sacrifice and he enters to the holy place, and then he takes the blood and he drips it on the parochet itself. So you see that there is a certain, if you now, maybe it'll be clarified a little later, think about what we said about boundaries, defining boundaries, the parochet that we move to the side in terms of the blood that we put over there as an atonement for our sins before he enters. Of course, there is the story, famous story, that Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi says that he said that he saw the parochet in Rome. Of course, after the destruction of the temple, the parochet made to Rome, and there were drips of blood on it. And they said to him, these are from the blood of the Korban of Yom Kippurim that was over there. So Rabbi Elazar was in Rome, and he saw it with that. And according to what he was explained, this was the shiraim, the leftover from the avodah of Yom Kippur of a Kohen Gadol, And of course, there is the famous legend about the parochet and what Titus did over there, and so on and so forth. And it says, "Va'amar I Elohaimu tzur chasav bo." So the Agadah tells us that Titu Arasha, Titus the wicked, shechiref v'gidef klape mala, that was doing horrific things, and it was really towards Hashem. So that's what we said. The parochet separates, which is the border, which defines the other, and really defines the other, means defines the domain of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the symbolism of the parochet is that the area behind it, that's where so-called Hashem is. So for us, there's no more Kodesh, there's no Kodesh Kodashim, and there is a shul. And the parochet went from the border or the boundary between the Kodesh and the Holy of the Kodesh to a separation between the area of the shul and what we call Aron HaKodesh, where we place the Torah itself. So from now, the parochet is hanging on the Aron, on the Aron HaKodesh, and when we open it to take the Sefer Torah, we move it to the side, which is really unbelievable. But it's very significant. Since the parochet creates that boundary, created that separation, and now that we move it, so now, and by doing so, creates what is holy, what is not holy, creates what is alive, what is not alive, and so on and so forth. Think about what happens to us right now as people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if you want, and of course, this is only for the Torah. That's why we put the Torah in the Aron. If you want to reach out for me, there is no separation between you and me. You can move the separation to the side to take my Torah, because my Torah is me and I am the Torah. You could reach out for me. But you need to remove it to the side. Therefore, the separation many times comes from us. If you want to be midabek b'kodesh, if you want to connect yourself to the holy, there will be no separation between you and Ribono Shel Olam. Which is an amazing concept. So next time you go to shul and they do Ptichat HaEchal, you need to understand how significant is that ritual that we do and what's behind it. It's not just taking the Sefer Torah out. It is showing us that the Torah is capable to remove any barrier between us and Ribono Shel Olam. And that's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And the same thing here. We all need a parochet inside of us to really divide our life. In other words, you have to create those different chambers in your life. You have to create to know when work starts and work ends. Don't bring your work at home and don't bring your home to work. You need to understand that there is time to take the Torah out and reach out and not to stay at home. Because if you haven't connected, you stayed away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You didn't want to come. You didn't want to come to Yeshiva. You didn't want to reveal, to break the klipot. Whoever is laughing over there. And we need that. And our project to all of us is really building a bayit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, the Mishkan and the Mikdash and the temple that came after that, it's really bizarre. I mean, why do we need that? Shlomo Melech that built the Mikdash, he himself asked this kushia, the kasha. And he says in Sefer Melachim Aleph, Pasuk Chet to Chav Zayin, says the following: Ki ha'omnam yeshev Elokim al haaretz. Kadosh Baruch Hu going to come dwell in the land. Hinei hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yilachlechucha. Av ki habayit hazeh asher baniti. In other words, God needs a house. Why does he need a house for? So we need to understand that God does not need a house. God does not need a temple. It all is a symbol for us to learn. So let's look, for example, at the concept of the menorah that brings the light. So we build a house for Akadosh Baruch Hu. We build the temple, and now we need to light it because every house needs some form of lighting into the house. And of course, also the house of God needs some kind of light. But here there's a certain absurd in that. There's a certain paradox. What? God needs light to see. But if there's no light, God doesn't see. I mean, it's crazy. So every house has two different forms of light. We have, in the day, we have windows, right? Which allow the sunlight to come in, to shine it. And at night, we have the electricity. We have lights that bring it up, that we make it. So in regards to the windows of Bet HaMikdash, there is a very weird expression. It says, Vayas labait, and he made to the temple, chalonei, he made windows, shkufim ve'atumim, which is really a contradiction. Shakuf means clear, and then atum means opaque. So you can be clear and opaque at the same time. Look at Sefer Melachim, Aleph, Perek Vav. So, of course, the Talmud, as in a darshan way, brings that absurd concept. It says shakum ve'atum, right? What's it? And then the Gemara says, "Umore lo le'ora ani tzarich." The Gemara in Menachot in Perek Vav says, "I don't need the light, but rather the opaque window brings about or emphasis that Ribono Shel Olam does not need the light, because otherwise it will make it completely clear." And in regarding to the menorah, the Gemara says, "V'chi la'ora tzarich." What, the Kadosh Baruch Hu needs a candelabra over there? V'alo kol 40 shana, for 40 years, שהלכו בני ישראל במדבר, לא הלכו אלא לאורו. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, in Daf Chavbet Amud Bet, says for 40 years, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lit the way for the Jews to go in the desert. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs light. So let's leave this question to the side a little bit, and let's look at the concept of light, what we're talking about. Light is one of the fundamental concepts that turn into markers of and symbolizes good, something that is desire, or what we call a person who is very different than everybody else. We call it enlightened. In other words, he has a tremendous light. And that expression is across the board by different cultures and religions and so on and so forth. But let's look, for example, by Judaism. So one of the most famous books in Judaism, in the Jewish library, is called the Zohar. Zohar means splendor. Splendor means light. So it seems that the Masoret of the Kabbalah, and not only that, the Kabbalah itself, chose the light as a representative of the real of the real substance, of something that is real. So if what's his name? This guy who says, if Thales said everything is water, so they says everything is light. The Rambam used the concept of light as an expression to define the intellect or truthfulness or reaching truthfulness. And he had tremendous fine-tuning on that. And he says the following, Al tachshov, don't think, שהסודות הגדולים האלה, those great secrets, ידועים עד תכליתם וסופם לאחד מאיתנו. Don't think that any one of us knows the secrets of all those, of what the Torah says and so on and so forth. He says, look, it's not like this. אלא, but rather, שפעמים האמת, sometimes the truth shines on us in such an extent that we think that it's a daylight. And after that, whatever is your habits and so on and so forth, your materialistic, tendencies come in and close the light. Remember, the light that comes in Bet HaMikdash. These are windows that are clear and yet opaque. That depends how truthful you want to be. And if you look at Bet HaMikdash, when you go inside the tabernacle, what do you have inside? Remember what I told you before, we have the 10 Commandments, we have the Torah. So therefore the Torah is the light, because the Torah is the truth. So it says that according to the Rambam, sometimes you might get a tremendous inspiration of the Torah, but your materialistic, behemic tendencies would make you sealed again, opaque. You can't see the light. So it says, and it goes like this, the Rambam says, until we go back to be in a complete darkness, of like a complete night darkness, close to what we were in the beginning. So therefore the Rambam says, it is like as we are sometimes as a person that from time to time, lightning bolt comes in and he sees the way he sees his way in a very dark night. And there are some of us that sometimes lightning shows time after time after time after time, and it would seem that he is always inside light that is endless light, into such an extent that night becomes to him to a day. And he says that is the level of the highest prophets, in which it was said about him, V'atapo amod imadi. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, that was the level. V'ne'emar alav, when it says on him, Ki karan or panav bedabro ito, that his face of Moshe, because he was so exposed to the truth, he became, pay attention, he became the source of light. Karan or panav, he was projecting light from his face. So, and of course there are those who the lightning comes one time in every night, and that is the level, vayitnabnu velo yisafu, the people who had a one time epiphany, and from that point they did it. And if you want to look further, look at the introduction or the opening for the Moreh Nevuchim by the Rambam. Light is very elusive. And scientists and so on and so forth really haven't yet, I guess, defined what light is really all about. Is it a wave, or is a combination of particles that comes together? Even though the greatest thinkers that made it into an, as an expression to their or used it as a tool for their expression, really had a hard time grasping what light is all about. The Torah, light is something that goes away from the vessels, from the beginning, from Bereshit. Light is the first thing that was created in the first day. But the lights that we have were created on the third day. So from here and on, Chachamim, both Rishonim and Acharonim, try to really understand what is this light and trying to hold on to this light. And that's what they said. Letzadikim, for the righteous people, le'atid lavo, ketzad yachol liot or lelo meorot. Right? How could it be light without source of light that going to go in and spread it and project the light? So therefore, it seems therefore that it's a different light. So the regular people have light sources in which they see the light. To the righteous people, there is a light with that source. There's no source of light. There is light as a concept. In other words, there is the truth. Light is a concept. Light is an entity. It's a creation by itself. So there are two different types of lights. And that's the light of the truth. So if you talk about a person who was really known for his ability to express light, was no other than, anybody knows? Rembrandt. Anybody heard about Rembrandt? The famous painter. So one of the greatest things about Rembrandt, that he discovered that light is not only projected or bestowed upon from the outside on the object, but many times comes from the object itself out, and that makes his painting very, 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 very special. So, he he has his paintings like all over museums and so on and so forth. And there was the Arav Yitzchak, Avraham Yitzchak Cohen, Haraya Cook, when he, by the way, Rav Kook, all his books, or Orot HaTshuva, or Orot this, all his books of Rav Kook were always had to do with light. So it says about Rav Kook, when he was in London one time, he went to galleries or museums to see the paintings of Rembrandt. And he was so astonished from the way Rembrandt was able to express the light, not only that it's been reflected, as we said before, that they generate themselves, that he wrote that painter, parentheses, Rembrandt, is probably one of the tzaddikim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hid for them what is so-called the light of Bereshit, that a person can see from one world from the one side of the world to the other side of the world. So light cannot be held by vessels, and also from the expression. And it seems that only other types of expressions could hold or define what light is. Really to a point that light, if the closest thing to light will be water. And when you look at light as water, all of a sudden it takes a different reality to it. And don't forget, again, the Torah is referred to water as well. And I forgot who wrote it, so don't yell at me. I forgot who wrote it. Some scientist or some philosopher wrote it one time. He said that life, for whatever they are the derivative of the star of the light that comes from the stars. All life on Earth is being nourished from the light or radiation that comes from a red planet, who is a middle-aged rich planet, and we of course know all its name, and that's the sun. And the energy of that, the light of the sun turns life, of course, or creates life with the engagement of plant cells and animals and so on and so forth. But the main point behind this process is not the transformation of energy from one shape to another, that of course allows the single cell to thrive and multiply, or to a tree to bloom and to bring fruit, but rather it is for man to write his history and to write his destiny on this planet. If light is the Torah, and the Torah is light, and the light that we're referring to, that was the light. And now you see that we spoke about this many times when we learned Masechet Chagigah, that the Torah was created before the world, and so on and so forth. It is very important for us to remember that, to do everything that we can in our effort to connect daily with the Torah, to connect daily with the truth that is truthful for all, not just truth for me because I want to do something, to break away from the materialistic prison in which we put ourselves, to connect to something greater, to be able to put in our doors a barrier from the world outside, so the unholy would not penetrate into our house. When we put when we secure our perimeter, only then Kedusha can come into the house. That's why when a person is about to get married, the first thing he needs to do is to make sure that he knows the difference between the outside world and the inside world. Only then he should start pursuing a shidduch. And the girl needs to be a girl who is interested in Kedusha, who wants her husband to be a holy person. A woman that is going to tell her husband, don't sit with me, go to the Bet Midrash and learn. I don't need you to talk to me. How much are you going to talk to me? Don't talk too much. Then, when you're able to get it to define this, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally created men and women back to back. And if you know anything about When you go in, for example, do a patrol, you have to do the 360. 360 means that, let's say the first one walks and he looks forward. One looks on the right, one looks on the left, and the last one always looks at the back. So if I'm looking ahead of me and I can see 180, and I have my wife looking in the back also, we cover 360. That's what we need them. So if the husband and wife don't share this ability to secure and to define the holiness, you're going to get hit. You're not going to be able to create that sacred zone that is called your house. You're not going to. And therefore, you need to daily, would anybody think that they can go a day without food? Most of us after Yom Kippur says, we can take it. How can you go a day without learning Torah? How could you? If I would have to feed you food, as much as you learn Torah, Habibi, you're going to be all skinny. You're going to look like people from Somalia. And that's the concept of what the Torah tells us. To eat a little bit of bread, don't be indulging in pleasures. Connect to the light. Create a holy zone. Create a secure zone. But when it comes to the holiness, remove it, because there's no barriers between me, and that's what you need to make sure. HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe took Beit HaMikdash from us, but he allowed us, by taking Beit HaMikdash, a tremendous closeness that when we had Beit HaMikdash, we still did not have. And that's a tremendous lesson for all of us to remember. But it could only be achieved by coming to learn daily, by seeing things clearly and making sure that from the outside world, nobody can see what you're doing into your house. A sacred, safe zone. Shabbat Shalom.